Hi, friends. Welcome to episode 2 of the G Word Grief, a series of videos on the topic of grief I've decided to create. And if you were able to join us for episode 1, I referenced and drew from Francis Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and introduced his 5 gates of grief. And we focused on the first gate, which is called Everything We Love, We Will Lose, and did a little talk about that in some readings. Today, I want to dive into his second gate of grief, the places that have not known love. There is another entrance to grief, a second gateway, different from the gate connected to losing someone or something that we love. This grief occurs in the places often untouched by love. These are profoundly tender places, precisely because they have lived outside of kindness, compassion, warmth, or welcome. These are the places within us that have been wrapped in shame and banished to the farthest shores of our lives. We often hate these parts of ourselves, hold them in contempt, and refuse to allow them the light of day. We do not show these outcast brothers and sisters to anyone, and we thereby deny these parts of ourselves the healing salve of community. These neglected pieces of soul live in utter despair. What we perceive as defective about ourselves, we also experience as loss. Whenever any portion of who we are is denied, we live in a condition of loss. The proper response to any loss is grief, but we cannot grieve for something we feel is outside the circle of worth. That is our predicament. We chronically sense the presence of sorrow, but we are unable to truly grieve because we feel in our body that this piece of who we are is unworthy of grief. So Weller goes on to discuss shame, and he mentions a well-known writer who's focused much of his career exploring shame and the concepts around shame, Gershon Kaufman. And Kaufman describes that shame leaves us feeling unspeakably and irreparably defective. Weller goes on to say, no one arrives on this earth encrusted with shame. Rather, shame settles in our bones over time, accumulating during times of neglect or violation. Shame closes the heart to self-compassion. We live with an internal state best characterized as self-hatred. In order to loosen shame's grip on our lives, we need to make 3 moves. The first is from feeling worthless to seeing ourselves as wounded. The second emerges from the first and is a shift from seeing ourselves through the lens of contempt to one of a budding compassion. And the third is moving from silence to sharing. As long as we see our suffering as evidence of worthlessness, we will not move toward our wounds with anything but judgment. So the second gate of grief, the places that have not known love, essentially. And I might have said that wrong. Oh no, I didn't. The places that have not known love. So let's see. I just brought up a lot through his teachings and what he has to say and reflect upon when it comes to this gate, the second gate of grief. These are really hard topics to talk about, these parts of ourselves that we banish or exile or repress, because in our culture, we're not really provided the safety for that. to talk about these things. I mean, I think there is a shift going on. There certainly is around discussing the importance and value of mental health, mental wellness. However, for many of us, we did not grow up with that being a normalized concept, a norm, something that was valued. The language wasn't there to talk about it unless, you know, you were in a unique situation and had parents that were very emotionally intelligent and able to give you those tools and skills. But for many of us, we've had to kind of claw our way through that stuff, often usually after many bouts of pain or dysfunction, or having to face some area of our life where, you know, I don't want to say we've fallen short, but we weren't properly prepared for, so we were reactive or you know, had that fight or flight response that our nervous system is known for. So this idea of the places that have not known love being this ongoing loss that we experience if we're not able to, as he described, part of this overcoming shame or healing is, I'm taking it as it's a reframing. So for many of us, a lot of this lens we develop and the way that we move through the world has to do with the way that we're conditioned and whether or not we're able to, you know, I feel like this is a concept that's being brought up in a lot of areas right now, this great unlearning and then a relearning. And a lot of that can be really helpful when it comes to how we think of ourselves and these parts or these memories or experiences. For many of us, traumas that we've had in adolescence, that whether or not we realize it, we will bring into our adulthood. And shame is something that all of us are affected by, touched by when we're developing. And it's something that if it remains unaddressed over time, it will continue to pop up in different areas of our life and impact how we operate and how vulnerable we're able to be, how authentic we're able to be, how truthful. And this idea of this reframing, and kind of honestly, to me, it's like a befriending of these exiled parts of ourselves, he said outcast brothers and sisters. It's really painful and really hard. However, it's completely transformative and necessary for healing and for integration. And I didn't read this in the book, but he talks about, when he went to therapy and these unwanted parts of himself, part of his motivation for going to therapy was to have his therapist help him remove these parts that he wrapped in shame. And I find that quite true, right? These parts of ourselves, maybe things we've done or things we believe about ourselves that we so desperately want to just be gone. But that isn't how it works. So to be able to name these parts, recognize them as wounded and not as worthless, to be able, I like that he calls it budding compassion. Like, it's not like self-compassion happens overnight, but this willingness to try to practice some compassion, to offer some space and kindness to those parts. And I don't know, see what can happen from there. So I think that's all I have today. Please feel free to comment or reach out and reflect. Thanks.